Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is October 3rd around here. Going to be a great show for you today. We will continue on with our Week 6 picks, and we'll start with the main event of the weekend. Missouri at A&M, going to be a really fun game down there in College Station. We'll break it down for you in the first segment. Then we'll get to the rest of the SEC matchups of the week. We'll get Auburn at Georgia. Obviously, Ole Miss going to South Carolina is a little bit of a sketchy one. Then we'll get to Tennessee at Arkansas, and then we'll get into some ACC games of the week, and it doesn't include the one that you think it would include this time of year, but SMU at Louisville is a really big time game. I think Duke at Georgia Tech is a little bit of an under the radar game that you should be on the lookout for, and then Miami heading all the way out to Cal is definitely a sketchy one for the Hurricanes. Then we'll get to a week 6 whip around, just all of the different games that I haven't had a chance to get to yet. And then we'll do a little bit of a hot take Thursday, give you all of the takes that I have going into this weekend, and we might just continue that into tomorrow, who knows. But let's get into the first segment here, and let's talk about Missouri A&M. And this is a very interesting game. I think when you talk about this one, it kind of goes by the wayside a little bit because it doesn't have Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, Bama, all the teams that are towards the top of the SEC. I think this could be the 5th team. I think whoever wins this one is absolutely in a position to be very much in the SEC conversation. And I think it would be really interesting to see that unfold. I just realized I forgot to do this. Before we jump in, fully at least, let's get to this real quick. We get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and if you all want to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here. Use that super chat feature at the bottom of the Sports Network chat. Click on that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like, and we can have a fun back and forth here. But now, let's get into all the craziness that's going to go on in College Station this upcoming weekend, and I think it's going to be a really fun game. I think it's going to be a little bit back and forth. I think both these offenses, although they're not necessarily as potent as you'd like them to be right now, they're definitely very capable, and they can do a number of different things that are going to cause you problems. I think Missouri's in particular needs to take a step forward. I don't think there's any argument there, even from Missouri fans, that it needs to take a step forward the rest of the way throughout the season if they're going to make the effect that they very much want to make this year. So this would be the perfect game to get it started. Obviously, you have a number of games coming up. Main one is being Bama, but at the end of the day, this is a game where if you win this one, you probably set yourself off on a very good path. If you lose it, then you're in a weird spot going forward, and Missouri's walking a little bit of a tightrope to get into the playoff because, frankly, I think 10-2 would put them right on that chopping block with a couple of the other teams in the SEC. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one get going. Obviously, A&M has a little bit of a quarterback situation. I do think it'll be Marcel Reed that trots out with the first team, but there's a world where Connor Wegman goes out there. I'd just be a little bit surprised with 3-0 record with Marcel Reed. I also think with that O-line playing the way that it is, probably want a little bit of a mobile quarterback back there. So definitely going to be really interesting. I think Missouri going to Kyle Field, it's going to be a battle. It's their very first road game of the season, and frankly, it's a really big test. It's the biggest test that they'll have on the field until they play Alabama in a couple of weeks in Tuscaloosa, and that's going to be a really fun battle. But at the end of the day, this might be the biggest game of the season for Missouri. I think this is a game where you looked at it in the beginning of the season and you said, it's a really manageable schedule. Maybe if they can win that A&M game, they're very much on their way to the CFP, and that's what they're hoping to do. And A&M, on the other side, obviously hoping to get their name back into the ring, would be undefeated in conference play, would have that one loss to Notre Dame, so they'd be very much in that conversation. So it'll be really fun to watch this one unfold. I think this team would be right up there, at least in the conversation for the SEC going forward. And there's a number of players to watch. I think Nate Noel is the guy that I want to talk about here for a second. This is a very smooth runner of the football. When he has the ball in his hands, he kind of glides around the field. He's really incredible to watch, and they're badly going to need him in this one. Had almost 200 yards in a couple weeks ago against Vanderbilt, but at the end of the day, when you talk about this A&M team, there are places you can attack them. You're not going to be able to do that if you can't run the ball. That's just the reality of playing A&M right now. It was the reality against Notre Dame. They couldn't really get anything going because that run game didn't really get going until, Jeremiah Love broke a couple of big plays. But at the end of the day, Nate Noel is a really fun player, one of those guys that could open up a lot of the things on the back end that they very much need to open up. And then Corey Flagg Jr. on the defensive side of the ball is someone I want to talk about because you talk about this A&M offense, especially under Marcel Reed. So much of it happens close to the line of scrimmage. There's so much, read option. There's so many short passes, things of that nature that someone like Corey Flagg is going to be playing a lot of hook zone, be playing a lot of spy, and just have to chase down Marcel Reed, just have to chase down Amari Daniels or Le'Veon Moss and keep this run game at bay. And then, frankly, you're probably in pretty good shape. So these linebackers, this front seven in general, really, if they can slow down this A&M rushing attack, then things get really interesting in a hurry for sure. And then I got Cyrus Allen, on the other side, a very, very talented player, a guy that was hurt for the first couple of weeks, but came back a couple of weeks ago and is a very dangerous player. I think you talk about this wide receiver room, it's not quite as deep as you would like if you're an A&M fan, but getting this guy back is absolutely huge for what they can do, and definitely gives them at least more options in that pass game, which obviously is a big benefit with a player like Marcel Reed that's not quite as polished as a passer. Giving him as many options as you possibly can is obviously going to be a huge benefit to you. So I think it's a hugely important player. I think he can make one big-time play in this game, and that could be the difference in this one, how close I think it's going to be. And then we got Bryce Anderson. I think this might be one of the best DBs in the entire SEC. He plays such a clean form of football, plays that nickelback position that we've talked about a number of times on here, and is not easy to play by any means. So he has a lot on his plate, and he's handling it very, very well. A very confident player, one of those guys that can help in the run, is very good in pass protection, in pass defense. A very dangerous player all over the field. He's one of those guys that if A&M's going to go a far way this year, he's going to have to make a number of headlines. He's going to have to be the guy that probably stands out on that defense, along with those edge rushers that are downright incredible. But on that back end, they're going to need a leader, and it sounds like Bryce Anderson is going to be that guy, especially against a team like this. You're going to need a good amount of organization against Missouri's wide receivers, and that's actually what I want to talk about. You got to get Luther Burden one-on-one. There are a number of places you can attack this A&M defense. The reality is the back end is probably the best place to do it. You just got to find openings. You got to find matchups that you like, and Luther Burden one-on-one with just about anyone in the country is going to be a matchup that Missouri likes. Now, how many times you're going to get that? It'll be interesting to find out. I think you can scheme that open a couple of different times, but at the end of the day, incredible player, one of those guys that if you don't get the ball in your hands, you're probably going to lose this game. In the last 2 games, he's had 12 catches, 193 yards, 3 touchdowns. So he's been kind of coming on the way that you would expect if you're a Missouri fan. But at the end of the day, this is something that they just have to do. They have to be able to find him on one-on-one coverage and then get the ball over top. And if he takes over this game, it's going to be impossible for the A&M offense to keep up. And then you got Marcel Reed. Marcel Reed played really good football. He's had 6 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions, but he's hovering right around 50% completion. Make him beat you with his arm. Make him be the guy that stands in the pocket and makes throws to Noah Thomas, makes throws to Cyrus Allen, makes throws to all these guys that, frankly, he is capable of doing that. He's not going to be able to do it for 4 quarters. He's going to give you a mistake at some point during that, and you'll be able to take advantage. And Missouri's been not great at taking away at getting picks this year, but definitely have players on that back end that can make those plays. There's no two ways about that. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, and if they can keep Marcel Reed in that pocket, you probably have a pretty good winning formula, honestly, in this game. And then finally, hold that pass rush at bay. It is a very good group over there at A&M, and they are going to cause problems for you pretty much every which way from Tuesday. And your quarterback is one that has not hit the stride that you expected from him in this year, and you need to get that guy going. You can't get him going if he's on his back. So Nick Scourton, Shamar Stewart, Cassius Howell, they're going to be issues. You're going to have to handle them, and there's a number of people that can. There's no two ways about that. Marcus Bryant's been a great addition from SMU to fill out that offensive line. The right tackle, not quite as good. So you definitely have a couple areas that you're going to have to shore up, and Nick Scourton's coming off a game where he had 2 sacks and a forced fumble. Shamar Stewart's one of those guys that if he turns it on in 1 second, he is one of the most dangerous players in the country. He showed that against Notre Dame, and frankly, he could very well show that again. So Missouri has a path to victory. There's no two ways about that. They're absolutely a team that can get this done, but they need to do a couple of things that they just haven't really been able to do this year thus far. Then we got A&M, and I think the biggest thing about A&M, especially with Marcel Reed at quarterback, they have so many guys that can attack you on the ground. You have Le'Veon Moss, you have Amari Daniels, you have Marcel Reed that you're not going to be able to keep track. There's not enough linebackers, there's not enough DBs to go around, especially when you have a couple of players that can get deep like Cyrus Allen. So you're going to have to be very disciplined. And A&M, you're going to have to use as many rushers as you possibly can. You got 3 guys, those 3 I just talked about, over 200 yards. Le'Veon Moss has been rolling the last couple of weeks and has been absolutely incredible, has topped 100 yards twice this year. he is a very dangerous player. You got to give him room. And the way you give him room is just spreading this ball out, making sure this defense has to cover as many guys as possible, and then you let your real playmakers take over, which is Le'Veon Moss, which is Amari Daniels, which is Marcel Reed running the ball. So there's going to be a number of things going into this game, but I think A&M, when you talk about what they can bring to the table, the ways they can hurt defenses, it's just keeping those legs fresh and throwing multiple guys at a defensive front, at linebackers, and making it really tough for you to get any beat on the way that they're running the football. The other part of this is I think A&M has a really good defensive front. That's one of the things that, frankly, is probably the best part of their team, at least one of the best parts of their team. You got to trust that front. You got to be able to put this game in their hands and say, we know they're going to run the ball. We know Nate Noel, we know Marcus Carroll are going to be a problem for us. We're going to let you handle that. We fully trust you to handle what's going to come at us in the run game, and then we'll deal with the pass game. The reality is there's too many guys on that Missouri offense, especially at the wide receiver position, to not sit back just a little bit. You don't necessarily have to play prevent defense or anything crazy by any means, but you have to make sure those guys are in front of you, because Mookie Cooper gets deep one time, Luther Burden gets deep one time, Theo Weiss gets deep one time. This entire game changes, and frankly, that Missouri offense becomes really terrifying to deal with in a hurry. So you can't give them a pulse. You can't let them run the ball, and then, obviously, this kind of leads me into the next part of this. Make them one-dimensional. Missouri is an offense that has not gotten going to the degree that they want to, but at the end of the day, they're averaging over 200 yards on the ground and through the air. If you allow them to do that on Saturday, you're going to get buried. There's no two ways about that. I don't expect them to allow that, but the reality is, let's say they take that rushing total down to 70 yards, down to 80 yards. They're in a really good position, because as good as Brady Cook is, as good as these wide receivers are, he has been a little inaccurate at times. And if you take away that run game, if you heat him up in the pass rush, it's going to be nearly impossible for him to find his rhythm in this game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think A&M is going to have a lot of answers. So Missouri's going to have a lot of answers as well. They're going to have to if they're going to want to win this game. And frankly, I think it's going to be a really tough one to deal with for Missouri. I don't like them in this game. It's one of those back and forth games. I think it's going to come down to the wire, and I think A&M is going to be able to win it. I think this Missouri team is just not where they need to be right now, and they're walking into their first road game in Kyle Field. It's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be really hard for them to deal with that, and if they can and they come out with a win, then I am on here on Monday talking about them as a CFP contender, because they very well would be. I just think A&M is going to be too much. I think that defense is going to have enough answers for that offense, and frankly, I think Marcel Reed's going to be plenty to deal with for that defense. So it's going to be a really fun game down there in College Station. I do have A&M eking out a very, very close win, but it's going to go back and forth. I feel pretty good about that, and I think whoever walks out of it is looking at the CFP as a real possibility. No longer as this abstract thought that if a couple of things go our way, particularly on the A&M side, but if a couple of things go our way, maybe we can make something happen to. We're absolutely going to make something happen, because look at the schedule in front of us. So I do have A&M winning this one. I don't feel great about it. I think it could go either way in this one. Cannot wait for this game to unfold, and whoever wins it is off to the races, that's for sure. But let's take our first break here, and when we come back, we got a number of other SEC games to get to. Auburn, Georgia, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas. We'll get to all of them right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about that big time game going on in College Station this upcoming weekend. I do have A&M eking out a win in that one. I think it's going to be a little bit back and forth, definitely could go either way, and whoever walks out with a win has to feel really good about where they are going the rest of the season. But let's get into the rest of the SEC matchups. We just got to the biggest one of the weekend, but there's a couple others that we're going to have to talk about here really quickly, and we're going to roll through this pretty quickly like we did yesterday. But Auburn at Georgia is a huge game for Georgia. Obviously, bouncing back from getting punched in the mouth last week. No other way to put it. So it's going to be a really, really fun game. I think how they respond to this one is going to define who they are. And frankly, they probably have to dominate. If they're going to make their fans feel really good about where they are going forward, they're probably going to have to roll in this game. And then Auburn's in a kind of weird spot. I think Peyton Thorne played okay last week, obviously made the final mistake that was the exact thing that lost them the game, so it makes a difference in his performance. But at the end of the day, played pretty good football for about 3 quarters there. I think when you look at what Auburn had going into this game, they can't feel great when Alabama made that big time play and took that win, because they knew that was going to make Georgia a little bit angry. So we'll see what happens in this game, but players to watch, I think Dominic Lovett's got to step up. You see, look at this Georgia offense, and you're trying to figure out who the guy is. You're trying to figure out who the guy is that they can go to every single down, or at least go to consistently, and feel really good about it. It was Ladd McConkey last year. It was Brock Bowers as well, and I think they're kind of finding something in Lawson Lucky, so that's something to keep an eye on. But Dominic Lovett is a guy that just very badly needs to be a huge part of this team. When you talk about a guy out of the slot position with a quarterback like Carson Beck, you can absolutely do a ton with that player. You got to get more from him. There's no two ways about that, and I think this could be a little bit of a turning point for his season. It also could be, he's a little bit disappointing this year, and Georgia fans get a little bit upset with where they are. But at the end of the day, I think he's a very important player, and we'll see a lot of number 6 going forward. Raylan Wilson just got a little bit more important in this game, because it sounds like Smile Mondon will not be in this game. No really disclosed reason, so I don't really know what's going on there. But at the end of the day, very talented player in Raylan Wilson, and he's going to have a lot on his plate. Jarquez Hunter is a very, very good running back who's going to be running at you pretty much every day or every down, and it's going to be tough to deal with. There's no two ways about that. He has plenty of guys to go with him, but he's going to have a lot on their shoulders on Saturday. Perry Thompson's a guy that I think Auburn's just got to unlock a little bit more. I think they have plenty of guys, no two ways about that. Keandre Lambert-Smith, Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons, all of these guys all over the field, but I think Perry Thompson opens them up a little bit more. And I think when you talk about this offense, there's so much down the field stuff that sometimes you just need a tactician. And I think Perry Thompson could be that guy for this team. So I think he's really important to just keep the chains moving. Be that third down guy. Be the guy that can make that catch for 5, 6, 8 yards and make things a little bit easier for you on third down, or at least get that first down on third down. So going to be awesome to watch this player unfold the rest of the season. And then you got Jalen McLeod. He is such a good player on the interior of that defense for Auburn. And frankly, when you face that Georgia offensive line, you're going to have to play elite football. There's no two ways about that. If you're not going to be able to shed a block and put Trevor Etienne or whatever running back is coming at you on the ground, Georgia's going to run all over you and take over this game. And I almost promise you that they will not stop until they absolutely bury you. So it's going to be awesome to watch this one unfold. But Jalen McLeod might be the most important player for Auburn in this one. And then you got keys to the game. We're going to figure out what Georgia's really about. When you talk about Georgia, obviously, they haven't lost a regular season game since 2020. It is going to be a little bit different walking into this game. Now, I think they'll be more than fine, at least generally, but there could be some holes there. There could be some players that aren't playing quite as hard as you would expect them to play. There could be some broken coverages the same way they were against Alabama, and then you're looking up and saying, they won this game, but it didn't look quite as good as you would hope. So the mentality of Georgia is going to be huge. Walking into this game and saying, we're not just here to win. We're here to absolutely dominate them and get back on the right track, and we'll see if they can do that. And then eliminate big plays. Obviously, that's the way Auburn's going to win this game. They're going to hit a couple of big plays over the top, and then Georgia's going to give them a couple of mistakes back. But if you can eliminate that, if you're Georgia, there's almost no chance that Auburn wins this game, if I'm being totally honest. Malachi Starks on that back end is going to have to play better football than he did last week. Had a couple of not so great coverages, although the one tipped pass is just ridiculous in every sense of the word by Ryan Williams. But at the end of the day, they got to keep a cap on this offense. If you can't, then this one could get a little bit interesting. But if you make sure those deep balls do not get connected on, it's going to be a long day for Auburn. And then the O-line versus D-line battle is going to be really interesting. Georgia's O-line did not play well last week. I don't think I need to tell you guys that, but they badly need to bounce back. Auburn averaged 3.3 yards per carry last week. They both need huge performances this week, and frankly, they're both really good defensive lines on the other side. So it's going to be a lot to handle, and frankly, I just think Auburn's catching Georgia at the worst possible time. I think if Georgia was to win that game, come back, get an emotional win, maybe you have a little bit more of an opening here, but Georgia's going to be locked in for this one. I feel very confident in that, and I think they're going to just bury Auburn and get their fans back in on this season, back excited about what they can do. Then we got this game, and I think a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are very interested in what's going to happen here. It's a huge moment for Lane Kiffin. There's no two ways about that. You saw what happened last week. There are about 1 million questions about what this team is going to be going forward after last week. He has to be able to answer all of the questions. He has to be able to put together a really good offensive game plan. He has to be able to help out this offensive line against a ridiculous pass rush that we'll talk about here in a second. He has to be able to do these very, very important things as they move forward this season, and especially on Saturday, if he doesn't want his season to effectively end on Saturday. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it sounds like South Carolina might get Lenore Sellers back. A little bit up in the air right now. I expect him to be on that field, but we'll see what happens there. Definitely will change that game one way or the other. Juice Wells is a guy I want to talk about here for a second because he's going to get a lot of work on Saturday. I can absolutely promise you that. There are going to be cornerbacks in his face. He came over from South Carolina to Ole Miss, and South Carolina players and fans do not like this guy very much. I'll just be totally honest with you guys. There will be corners that are going to play press coverage against Juice Wells and absolutely jam him at the line. I can absolutely promise you that. He is going to take a little bit of a beating, and we'll figure out if he can handle it. We'll figure out if he can be the wide receiver 2 that Ole Miss badly needs in this game, and we'll figure out if he can handle all of the craziness that's going to be around him in this weekend, and it'll be a lot to handle. There's no two ways about that. Chris Paul Jr. is another guy to watch because you talk about the South Carolina offense. When you have to deal with Lenore Sellers or Robbie Ashford, really, you're going to have to get on the edge, out on the edge in a hurry. And then you have Jarquez Hunter running straight downhill at you. Not an easy thing to deal with. It's going to be really interesting to see how they combat this just with the linebackers as a whole, but this is probably your leader of the defense, at least in the linebacker room. This is going to be the guy that they're all looking to. They're all kind of gravitating towards to give him all of the assignments. It's going to be really interesting to see what he can do, especially in that atmosphere. It's going to be really tough and probably one of the bigger challenges he's faced all his career. Then you got Rocket Sanders over there on the offensive side of the ball for South Carolina. You're not going to win this game without running the ball, and especially without Rocket Sanders and without Lenore Sellers getting out on the edge and making a couple of big-time plays, because Ole Miss is probably going to make a couple of big plays. I feel pretty confident in that. They're going to hit a couple of big-time passes downfield, and if you can't counter them with a couple of long, sustained drives to keep that offense on the sideline, it's going to be a long day. It's exactly what Kentucky did a great job of on Saturday. It's something South Carolina needs to do really well this upcoming Saturday. And then you got Dylan Stewart. This is one of the biggest difference makers in the entire sport, one of the best freshmen in the entire sport among all of the crazy freshmen that we're dealing with this year. But at the end of the day, this is one of those guys that can just totally take over a game. We saw it against Old Dominion. Him and Kyle Kennard just buried them in every sense of the word, and he's going to try to do the same exact thing on Saturday. And frankly, that Ole Miss offensive line does not necessarily inspire confidence right about now. But keys to the game, you got to counter this pass rush. We just talked about Dylan Stewart. Kyle Kennard is going to be an absolute problem. And frankly, there's a couple other guys that could be absolute problems for you if you're not careful. This is a very, very good pass rush for South Carolina, and they have the ability to just be the story of this game. When we talk about this game, we recap it on Monday, there's a reality where we spend 5 minutes talking about Kyle Kennard, talking about Dylan Stewart, and the effect they had on this game because they're that big of a problem. So what can Micah Pettis do? What can Diego Pounds do to handle all of this? Because it's going to be a lot to handle, and those guys will absolutely take over a game if you let them. And then the Ole Miss leadership. This is going to be really interesting to watch. We know Ole Miss got a lot of guys from the portal. It's kind of a new group in that locker room. They just got hit in the mouth, and we'll figure out who is kind of the leader of that room, especially going into a really tough environment. We'll figure out, I know Jackson Dart's a pretty good leader. I know that Trey Harris is obviously a leader on that team. I don't have a lot of other names for you. I think there's a number of other guys that could be leaders, like Chris Paul Jr., like Walter Nolan, like Caden Prescorn. But the reality is, I'm not sure if those guys are where they need to be because they haven't really been tested yet. This is where they're really going to be tested, and they didn't necessarily pass last week. We'll figure out if they can do a little bit better this week. And then you got to be able to find more weapons if you're Ole Miss. I understand Trey Harris is one of the best, if not the best, wide receiver in the entire country. you got to find more. There's no way you're going to be able to beat any team in the SEC, really, if you're only attacking them with one guy. So Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, Caden Prieskorn have to be involved in this game plan. They pretty much have to be involved early because that at least gets you off the ground. And frankly, this is a really weird game. It's going to go back and forth. It's going to be weird, but I don't feel good about this Ole Miss team. I think they're in a really weird spot. I don't think the physicality is where it needs to be. And frankly, I think a team with that many transfers that just got punched in the mouth at home going on the road to South Carolina is not the place you want to be. So I'm going to pick South Carolina. I'm going to go with South Carolina by 3 points here. I know it sounds a little bit crazy, but at the end of the day, I don't think Ole Miss has the juice to take on this challenge. I really don't. And if they do, and we come back on Monday and they've totally blown out South Carolina, I will apologize to Ole Miss. But as of right now, I don't have a real reason to fully believe in this team. But moving forward, Tennessee-Arkansas is going to be a fascinating game over there in Fayetteville. One of those games that I just think it's going to be a little bit harder for Tennessee. I think there's going to be a little bit of a gap that forms in this team, and we'll see what happens as they kind of adapt to that. But at the end of the day, Tennessee passed with flying colors at Oklahoma. This is just another test, and maybe a slightly easier test, although I think it's a little bit of a toss-up. But at the end of the day, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how they respond to it, and frankly, likely going to define this team going forward. Brew McCoy is a player that I want you guys to watch on Saturday because I think he's kind of finding himself in this offense. It was all about Dante Thornton and all of these incredible players that they have on the outside early in the season. I think as you get further into SEC play, having those big bodies, having those Brew McCoys, even Dante Thornton and even Chris Brazzell, having those guys to go to is going to be huge for Nico Iamaleava. And especially in some road environments, having that big body, just find 15 and throw the ball up, is going to make him feel a lot better about where he is. And I think Brew McCoy is going to become a bigger and bigger part of this offense moving down the road. Dominic Bailey's another guy to talk about because Tennessee's going to run the ball at you. Jaquindon Johnson is someone that is not going to back down from a fight, and we'll see if Dominic Bailey and Bryson Eason can handle that because it was something that A&M handled pretty well last week. It's something that if Tennessee doesn't handle, then it's going to be a really long day for him. And then you got Jaquindon Jackson, one of the best running backs in the entire country right now, just doing incredible things for that Arkansas offense, and frankly, he might just be in the entirety of that offense right about now. So he's someone that's going to be hugely important in this game. And frankly, I think we all understand the best defense for a Tennessee offense is just keep them on the sideline. Make sure the ball is not in their hands, and then we'll deal with it once it is. So it's going to be huge for this team to just sustain drives and Jaquindon Jackson to get 4 yards, 3 yards, 2 yards, and just keep the chains moving and keep rolling down the field. And then you got TJ Metcalf on that outside. He's had a number of picks this year. I believe he's had at least 3, maybe even 4. If he gets a pick in this game, if he can rattle Nico Iamaleava, maybe things start to form. Maybe there's a little bit of a gap that you can take advantage of if you're Arkansas, but you got to force that mistake. I think TJ Metcalf is the guy that could possibly do that, and then maybe things get a little bit more interesting in this game. Keys to the game, I think Tennessee's run defense is going to be huge. Arkansas is going to run the ball. Tennessee has been incredible against the run. This is by far the best run team that they've faced. No doubt about that. They've only given up 43 yards per game, but at the end of the day, Jaquindon Jackson, Taylon Green are going to be a problem, and we'll figure out how well they can handle it. I think they'll be more than fine, but we'll see if there's a couple of gaps that form there. Nico's responsibility is going to be fascinating to me in this one. I think you talk about that Oklahoma game. He wasn't asked to do a ton. Now, he executed at a ridiculously high level for what he was asked to do. So it's not like I'm tearing him down by any means, but he's going to have more on his shoulders in this game. I feel pretty confident about that, and he's walking into another environment that might be a bigger problem than what Oklahoma was for him a couple of weeks ago. So it's going to be a lot on his shoulders, and we'll see how he handles it. It's the next, evolution of Nico Iamaleava is putting a little bit more on his shoulders every single game, and we see how he handles it. It's going to be awesome to watch him develop, and I cannot wait to see what this kid can be the rest of the season. And then Taylon Green's got to be able to escape. There's so many different guys for that Tennessee defensive front that are going to get after him, that are going to cause problems for him. And he's going to have to make a couple of plays that are just outright ridiculous in this game. He's going to have to make a couple of plays like Kyron Drones was able to make against Miami, or a couple of plays that you just extend plays and then that defense is a little bit out of position, you hit that big play downfield. That's what Arkansas needs in this game, and if they don't get it, then it's going to be a long day for Taylon Green and this entire offense. I do like Tennessee in this game. I do think they're going to win 31-24, but at the end of the day, I think it gets a little bit sketchy around halftime. I think there's a moment that Tennessee realizes, okay, we're a little bit mortal here. We got to be able to handle business going forward, and it'll be a really fun game to watch. No two ways about that, but I do think Arkansas is going to be able to push them just enough to make things a little bit interesting for Tennessee. But a ton of really fun games in the SEC. That does not end it by any means, but those three really stand out to me. I do think South Carolina is going to get that win. I think Ole Miss is a little bit reeling right now, and I'm not sure they have the roots to go back to win that game. So it'll be really interesting to watch that one unfold. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to move over to the ACC. We have 3 ACC matchups to talk about, and Clemson and Florida State is not one of them. So it's going to be really interesting to break this down. Not where I thought we would be at this point in the season, but at the end of the day, we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some big time games over there in the SEC, and now it's time to talk about the ACC, because there's a couple of matchups that I very much want to break down for you guys, and no, it does not include Florida State Clemson, and that is very, very weird, but frankly, I don't think that's crazy at all. I don't think Florida State's at a point where it's really worth breaking down that game, at least in really long form terms, but let's get into these. We'll roll through this a little bit quicker than we did last segment, but going to be a really interesting game over there in Louisville, Kentucky this upcoming weekend. SMU's kind of finding their stride, and they very well could get back in the race for the ACC. They don't have an ACC loss at this point. Kevin Jennings is five touchdowns, 0 picks in the last 2 weeks, 391 throwing in those 2 games. So he's done exactly what they've wanted him to do. I think Louisville needs a little bit of a bounce back, and it's not necessarily the greatest pace to draw SMU. That being said, the SMU defense can be beat over top, and that's exactly what Louisville wants to do. So it'll be really interesting. Maybe we have a little bit of a shootout on our hands on Saturday. But Brashad Smith is someone I want to talk about. The SMU offense does a really good job of rotating in running backs. They have about 4 guys that they're willing to at least throw out there for a couple of snaps a game. Brashad Smith is going to get the majority of the carries, though. He's the guy that's going to be kind of that workhorse back, if you will, and definitely going to be the guy that Louisville sees a lot of times in this game. If he can take over this game, if he can get over 100 yards rushing the same way that Notre Dame wasn't really able to, and a couple other teams, especially when you're playing Louisville, has not done a great job over the last couple of years, it's going to be really interesting to see what SMU can do, and I think they have the guys to do it. The O-line's going to have to really hold up in this game. And then you got Ahmad Walker, a very talented linebacker for SMU. You talk about this Louisville team, there's so much emphasis on the pass. There's so much emphasis on going deep and finding those guys over the middle of the field that we kind of forget about Isaac Brown. We kind of forget about this run game that is so dangerous. They're going to have to handle that, and frankly, they're probably going to have to handle it with just the guys up front. They're not going to be able to, bring a couple of safeties down into the box. They're not going to be able to rush a corner off the edge to make sure you handle the run. They're going to have to handle it every which way just with those 6 guys or those 5 guys up front. Ahmad Walker is likely going to be one of those guys, so he's going to have a huge game for them. And then you got Chris Bell. I think he's a guy that you saw him against Georgia Tech. He's a very dangerous player with the ball in his hands. And with SMU's back end, I have some worries about that. I think there's some openings to be had in this team. But at the end of the day, I think when you talk about Chris Bell, Ja'Cory Brooks is going to be a problem. When you talk about Colin Lacey coming back, that's going to be a problem. This is the guy that I think could open everything up. This is the guy that I think when you have a million guys going deep, when you have a million people playing cover 3 and making sure they keep a cap on this offense, I think Chris Bell's the guy that can catch a drag and go 60 yards for a touchdown, or catch a dig route and go 40 yards for a big explosive play. So when you're chasing around all of the other guys that Louisville has, he might just be the guy that hurts you the most. And then we got Ashton Gillette. I think this is a guy, and that's frankly really unsung. When you talk about the defensive tackles in this game, he is very near the top of that list and doesn't necessarily get talked about that way. But a very, very talented kid, one of those that SMU is going to run the ball. They're going to absolutely try to keep you on your heels, especially even with Kevin Jennings. They're going to get him out on the edge and make him make a couple of plays. Ashton Gillette and that entire defensive front is going to have their hands full, and we'll see if they can handle it. And if they can stuff up that middle, it's going to be really, really hard for SMU to get anything going offensively. And then we got keys to the game. Who has more weapons? Because frankly, this is a battle of quantity. They have so many guys on both sides of the ball for these offenses that it's going to be really hard. Louisville will spread the ball out, especially with Colin Lacey coming back. It's going to be really hard to get a beat on who's catching the ball any given down. Plus, they got 3 running backs that are over 300 yards. SMU has multiple running backs that will hurt you, mainly Brashad Smith, but then you have a couple of wide receivers that are going to be problems, and then you got RJ Maryland. So there's going to be plenty of weapons out there. Who can deploy the most, who can switch it up the most and make these defenses just be guessing at the end of the day. And then you got SMU's back-end defense. We've talked about this before. SMU gave up 415 yards to TCU. I promise you Louisville can do the exact same thing. I promise you that they can tear them to pieces the same way TCU did. Now, SMU was able to score 66 points in that game, so it didn't necessarily matter. It's going to matter in this one. They can't let a couple of plays get deep because that will be the absolute end of this game. And then composure. I think everyone on that field is going to understand how big of a moment this is for them. I think they're going to understand that the ACC is a little bit wide open. Obviously, Clemson and Miami are setting the pace, but whoever wins this one could be right in that mix, maybe that third team right there. And then things get really interesting when they have to play a couple of these teams down the road. So I think it's a huge game for either one of these teams. I think SMU is going to win. I think they're going to get this win. I'm gone a little bit back and forth on this one, but at the end of the day, I think SMU's found something. I think they're going to be a team that's going to have to be worried about going forward, and I think Kevin Jennings is someone that probably should have been starting from the get-go. I was a little bit wrong about that quarterback battle. I thought Preston Stone should and would win it. He has not, and I think it's better off for SMU. Then we got Duke, Georgia Tech. This is a game that maybe doesn't jump off the page to you. Maybe it's not a huge deal to you by any means. Duke is 5-0, and Georgia Tech is one of the more fun offensive teams that you will see in the entire country. I think this is a sneaky big game in the ACC. I think if Duke can stay undefeated, they absolutely can throw their hat into the ACC ring. I think it'll be a little bit tough to do so the rest of the season, but at the end of the day, if you're undefeated, you got a shot. And then Georgia Tech has suffered 2 losses, but can play with really anyone in the conference. So it's not necessarily that I think they're going to win the ACC or make a run at it. I just think any given Saturday, whoever they play is going to have a problem on their hands. And this is going to be 2 rushing attacks. They absolutely love to run the ball, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But whoever can execute that plan better is likely going to end up winning this one. And talking about running the ball, let's go to the other side of things. Jordan Moore is going to have to be a factor in this game. You talk about Malik Murphy, so much of his ability is throwing the ball downfield. He has such a big arm. He has so much arm talent. You have to unlock it in a number of different ways, and I think Jordan Moore is one of those guys that can absolutely do that. He is such a dangerous player down the field, and you have so many players that are going to be worrying about Star Thomas on that Georgia Tech defense. Getting this guy deep is not going to be the hardest thing in the world. You're going to have to find him, no doubt about that, but he's a really dangerous player, and I think he could change this game in a second. There's no 2 ways about that. Alex Howard's the other guy I want to talk about, number 3 there, not number 91. He has 3 sacks on this year, leading tackler for Duke, and he's a very dangerous player. Very rangy, athletic kid that absolutely can keep up with what Georgia Tech's going to throw at them, which is a lot of RPOs, a lot of extended run game, a lot of stuff that gets you out on the edge. Alex Howard can chase him down, absolutely. He's going to be a really important player in this game and cannot wait to see what he can do in this one. Jamal Haynes is one of those running backs that should just be talked about more. He plays a really, really fun style of football. He's 5'9", about 185. He will run through you. He's incredibly fun to watch because you can tell every time he steps on that football field, there's nowhere else in the world that he would rather be. He's so much fun to watch out there, and I think he's one of those guys that if you can get him going in this one the same way you weren't able to against Louisville, if you can get him going in this one, then Georgia Tech's going to be nearly impossible for Duke to stop. And then you got Zeke Biggers. He's another guy, a defensive tackle that is really, really good over there in the ACC, just plays for Georgia Tech, so isn't necessarily getting the shine that he probably deserves, but he's one of those guys that can absolutely stonewall an offense. And with Star Thomas coming at them pretty much every which way from Tuesday on Saturday, I realize that's kind of weird, but every which way from Tuesday, it's going to be really hard for this defensive front to stop him, but Zeke Biggers absolutely can do it. The keys to this game, which running back is going to steal the show? We know that these teams absolutely are going to run the ball. Star Thomas, I believe, had over 200 yards a couple of weeks ago. Jamal Haynes is a very, very good player that struggled against Louisville, but pretty much every other game he's played really, really well. He's a very, very fun player, and whichever one probably finished with more yards might just finish with the win. It's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold, but maybe you just got to watch number 17 and number 11 for those two teams. And then you got a couple of big defensive plays. These are not two teams that I think are defensively inclined. I do think there are a couple of different things that they can do to cause some problems. Duke has done relatively well in defense. They haven't faced anything near what Georgia Tech is going to throw at them. So I expect them to struggle a little bit more. I think it's going to come down to a couple of big-time plays, whether it's Amari Harvey on that back end for Georgia Tech or someone like Zeke Biggers coming up the middle and getting a strip sack, whatever that looks like. You got to be able to get a takeaway, and then on the Duke side, obviously, you got to get one. Alex Thomas making a big-time play on someone like Haynes King, who has been known to make a couple of mistakes. You got to play mistake-free football, which is the other key for me. I think this game could go either way. I think both teams are walking in with some confidence. I think both teams are dangerous on any given Saturday. Probably means it's going to come down to a couple of big-time plays. It's going to come down to a couple of mistakes where you look back and you say, man, if Georgia Tech didn't go for it on that fourth down, or if Georgia Tech didn't throw that pick deep in the red zone, this game would be totally different, and maybe that's the case. I tend to believe Georgia Tech's going to be able to make less mistakes in this one. I think Duke just hasn't been tested to this level, going on the road, playing a team that is going to cause problems for you defensively. I just think it's going to be too much. I do like this Duke team, but I think the magical run comes to an end this week. Then we got Miami heading all the way out to California to face off against the Golden Bears. It is going to be a really tough game, and I won't get into the nickname that this game has been given, but look it up on Twitter. You'll enjoy it, don't get me wrong. But it's going to be a really, really fun game out there, and I think when you look at Miami, this is massive. This is one of those games, kind of like that Georgia game, kind of like that Ole Miss game this upcoming weekend. They just kind of got punched in the mouth. Now, they got out with a win, which makes all the difference in the world, obviously, but it was something that J.D. Pickell was talking about on his show. You have to be able to respond, and there's two ways that you can respond. You can respond by saying, man, we really got away with one, have to feel great going forward, we can kind of take our foot a little bit off the gas, or you can say, we almost just got humbled. We almost just took a loss that we were not expecting to take. We have to be able to lock in and get back on track. I tend to believe the latter is going to be true for this Miami team, but maybe there's a little bit of time that just takes a little bit for them to get going. Cal is going to get, or Cal should get their undivided attention. This is a very dangerous team, and we saw what they could do at Auburn, especially that defense. Very, very good and very opportunistic, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But some players to watch. Elijah Arroyo is a problem. He's becoming one of the best tight ends in the entire country, and when you're talking about all the receivers that Miami has on that team, it's really hard to keep track of a tight end as well, and he's becoming a problem at tight end. So he's so much fun to watch. I think he's one of those guys that you look at this Cal team, they're going to be good on the back end. Now, if you throw all of those weapons at them, it might be a little bit harder to keep track, and I think Elijah Arroyo might just be the mismatch that they need. And then you got Tyler Barron coming off the edge. This is such a dangerous player. You talk about Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback for Cal. He's a solid player. There's no two ways about that. If he gets heat up by this pass rush, it's going to be a really long day for him. There's no world where he's going to be able to really dissect this defense and go to work the way they want to if these edges are able to get around their tackles and just blow up a play pretty much every single time, and especially because they like to run a little bit of that read option. You set that edge, it's going to be a nightmare for them to run it. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Tyler Barron can do. Obviously, they have plenty of pass rushers over there, but I think this might be the most run-inclined pass rusher that they have. I think this might be the best at setting an edge, at doing the things that are a little bit more mundane but hugely important in a game like this. And then you got Javion Thomas. There's so much talk about Jaden Ott, and he is incredible. He's the best running back on this team, at least by my estimation. Javion Thomas is leading them in rush yards right now. He had a huge game against Auburn, which frankly probably gave them the win in that one, and now you're going back home. You're going to have to throw guys at them, and we'll talk about that here in a second. The run game is going to be hugely important for Cal, and those two guys that they have are really, really good duos. You got to keep him fresh. And I think Javion Thomas is a guy that you bring in for some of those short yardage things, and then Jaden Ott breaks a 65-yard run, totally changes this game. And then You got Craig Woodson. I think when you talk about this back end for Cal, the thing that they do is take the ball away. They're really, really good at doing that, and Craig Woodson might be the very best of the bunch. He can absolutely change this game in a second, maybe pick off a ball by Cam Ward and make him pay a little bit more than some of the other teams in the past have. So Cam Ward showed a little bit of gaps last week, and maybe Cal can take advantage a little bit more than Virginia Tech did. Some keys to this game. Obviously, Cal's going to have lengthy drives. It's much like that Tennessee-Arkansas game. You have to be able to keep that offense on the sideline. If you put them back on the field, you're probably going to get humbled again. That's just the reality of playing Miami at this very moment. So you got Jaden Ott, you got Javion Thomas. Use them as much as you can. Lean on this defensive line, and although I think they're very good, I think they'll be able to handle it for the majority of this game, you just got to break a couple of big runs. You just got to make Miami just a little bit nervous around halftime or third quarter of this game, and then maybe there's a mistake or two that put you over the top. So another part of this, Miami's got to avoid mistakes. Cam Ward showed a little bit of mortality last week, showed that he has a couple of openings, and I think when you talk about Cal, 10 picks in 4 games. It's an absolutely dangerous back end, and if you give them a couple of opportunities, they will take advantage and say thank you. They will totally take over this game, and I think Cam Ward is a very, very capable player. He has been known to be a little bit streaky at times. I think this could be a bounce-back game. This could be another game where you are left asking a couple of more questions about where Cam Ward is at going forward. And then the travel is going to play a factor. This is the first time that we've really seen someone travel this far for a college football game, at least in conference. It is going to be really hard to deal with. There's no two ways about that. These kids some of them haven't even gotten on the plane. It's going to be hard for them to deal with all of the craziness that is around this travel, and we'll see how it impacts them. We'll see how Miami can handle it, and it's just another variable that Miami has to deal with going into this game. I think they'll be fine. Now, I think this game could be a little bit interesting at halftime, and we'll talk about that here in a second, but this is a very, very good Miami team. I think they understand what happened last week was a little bit more of a wake-up call than, avoiding disaster and being able to take your foot off the gas pedal. So I think they'll be more than fine in this game. I think they'll take over late, and maybe that travel plays a little bit of a factor early. I don't think it'll play a factor in who actually wins this game. So it's going to be really awesome to watch these teams play. Very weird that FSU Clemson is not one of the marquee games that we are covering, but that's just where Florida State is right now. So we'll break that one down actually in this next segment. We'll break down all of the games that we haven't had a chance to get to throughout this week. Frankly, we'll continue this into tomorrow because there's a number of games this week that you're going to have to keep an eye on, and it's one of those weeks, man. It's one of those weeks that doesn't necessarily jump off the page. There's going to be plenty that happens. I can absolutely promise you that. But let's get to the rest of the games that we haven't gotten a chance to get to right after this. So stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the big-time ACC games for this upcoming weekend. Definitely some big-time ones, and not necessarily the ones that you would expect would be big around this time of year. But let's get into a little bit of a whip around a number of games that are going on this weekend that you're just going to want to keep your eyes out on. Obviously, the big-time games have been covered at this point, but there are a number of other ones that could very much define some conference races, and I think this one tonight is really interesting. You talk about a Texas State team that has pretty much everything in front of them. They badly want to win the Sun Belt. Sounds like they're going to stick in the Sun Belt for a while. We'll talk about that tomorrow, but a very, very dangerous team. Troy is a run-first team, which absolutely gives them a little bit of shot to possibly slow this game down, keep Jordan McLeod and this Bobcat offense on the sideline, and then possibly get a win. They're number 20 in the country, or Texas State is number 20 in the country in yards given up. Very, very dangerous team, but at the end of the day, I think it's one of those games that could be a little bit back and forth. Could be one of those really fun kind of interesting games on a Thursday night that maybe go a little bit under the radar with, Thursday night football, with playoff baseball, all of the different stuff happening, but get all of them on. Get Texas State Troy on that third TV and have a really fun game, because I think anytime the Bobcats get on the field, it's going to be really fun. I do like them in this game. I do think they get a big-time win, but Troy's one of those teams that absolutely can pull a rabbit out of the hat, run for 200 yards in this game, and totally take over it. Then we got UCLA heading over to Penn State, and it's kind of the perfect game for Penn State. They have a huge game next week against USC, and I think this is a very good team to just kind of settle the nerves, get everything in the right place. I hate to say that about UCLA right now, but that's kind of the reality of where they're at. They are a very pass-heavy team with Eric Bieniemy, and that's not necessarily a surprise if you saw him at the Chiefs, but 60% of the time, they are throwing the ball. They are 133rd in rushes per game. They're 131st in rush yards per game. They're not going to run the ball, and if they do, they're probably not going to run it very effectively. Frankly, using TJ Harden, or not using TJ Harden to the degree that they are, is absolutely insane, but it can't be the case on Saturday. You can't be a one-trick pony and expect to beat a Penn State team at home. There's just no way you're going to be able to do that. Now, Penn State needs to assert themselves. This defense is not very good. They're 117th in the country in pass yards given up. Make a statement, prove that you are still a team that can be explosive downfield the way that you weren't necessarily last week, and show that Drew Aller can step up and make those big-time throws that he was able to make in the early part of the year. Show that once again, and then go into the USC game with a ton of confidence. And frankly, I tend to believe that they're going to be able to do that. Then we got a Pitt team that we just have to be talking about more. This is a very, very fun team. Eli Holstein's playing about as good a football as you could possibly ask from a kid like that. He's doing incredible, incredible things, and this Pitt team's only favored by 3 points. It's a little bit weird. It's one of those lines that you look at and you say, do they want me to bet Pitt here, and is North Carolina going to get a win? It's one of those really weird lines that we're going to have to try to wrap our heads around, but at the end of the day, Pitt is number 12 scoring offense in the country, 14 in yards per game. They are an absolute problem, and North Carolina is in one of the toughest spots in the entire country. 2 consecutive really tough losses, a ton of questions about what Mac Brown's going to do in the future and even in the next couple of weeks around his job, and then Amari Hampton's really the only consistent commodity on that entire offense. So it's going to be tough for them to win this game. I think North Carolina has not been great against the pass, giving up more than 250 yards per game. Pitt's having 323 per game. It's going to be a nightmare for them to deal with, and I think Eli Holstein takes all the chances that he has in front of him and really just puts on a show in this game, if I'm being honest. Then we got Navy against Air Force, and this is a very interesting game. Blake Horvath is well worth your time. If you want to watch this game, absolutely do it. Blake Horvath is a problem and so much fun to watch on that football field. Air Force is going to be able to slow this game down. That's what they do. Navy actually is number 2 in the country in run percentage. Air Force is right behind him in 4. So it's going to be one of those games where every single possession is absolutely massive. That's always the case when these two face off and when any service academy faces off. But especially in this game, especially because Navy is undefeated, they badly need to be able to take care of the ball, make sure every single play is where they need it to be in. Cade Harris, a very dangerous player for Air Force that absolutely could take over this game. You have to make sure that you keep track of him. I do like Navy to keep the perfect season alive, but it's one of those games that very much we could look up in the fourth quarter, in the late third quarter, and Air Force is playing a 10-3 game, and Navy's going to have to fight back from behind. So it's going to be a really fun game. I think it's one of those that we know that those service academies, whenever they play, is going to have a little extra juice, and I think especially because Navy's undefeated, Air Force is going to have a little bit more about them on Saturday, if I had to imagine at least. This Indiana team is awesome. I absolutely love them. Frankly, I probably should have put their ranking there. They're 23rd in the country, and they very much deserve to be. This is a very fun team. Them only be favored by 14 in this game, frankly, feels a little bit low to me, if I'm being totally honest with you. I think Northwestern's one of those teams that just can't really score the football. Cam Porter's really the only guy that can make it tough for a defense on that offensive side of the ball, and Indiana's been really good against the run, only giving up 99 yards per game. So it's going to be really, really tough. Indiana does have a bye week next week, so makes it a little bit easier to just kind of say, leave everything out on there on the field, and we'll have 14 days to fully recover. So it's going to be really interesting to see what this Indiana team can do the rest of the way. For me, this game is just about mental toughness. It's about being able to walk into an environment that is not necessarily going to lock you in by any means because of how weird and how unique that thing is. It's going to be really hard to feel as intense about this game as you do about everything else. You're going to have to be able to lock in a little bit more. It's something that Indiana hasn't really had to deal with because they've been in a lot of games that against Northwestern, against a couple of these other teams towards the bottom of the conference where it's kind of a toss-up. This one should not be a toss-up by any means. Indiana should be able to handle business, go on, probably cover the spread, and continue their perfect season. But we'll see if they possibly stumble up there in the Chicago area. Excuse me, I apologize. Alabama heading over to Vanderbilt is a very, very interesting game. We're going to find out a lot about Kalen DeBoer and this Alabama team this upcoming weekend. Not necessarily we're going to figure out how good this team is. I think we all know how good this team is at this point. But it's going to be really interesting to just see what this team is after a win. See what they are after especially that emotional of a win. See who the leaders are on this team. I feel pretty good that I know who the leaders are, but we'll find out in no uncertain terms on Saturday. And I think Vandy's one of those teams that should be able to be handled. No two ways about that, but has every ability to make this one just a little bit sketchy. And then maybe we see a couple of holes in Alabama that we did not expect to see. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it's going to be a fun case study of just where the Alabama locker room is right now. If they come in and win by 45 points, we feel pretty good about where they are going forward. If they come in and win by 7, then maybe we're having a couple more questions, and Diego Pavia can cause those problems for you. I can absolutely promise you that. He is so much fun to watch. One of those guys that it does not matter who is on the other sideline. It does not matter, what that helmet is, what that insignia is. He's going to play his heart out, and he's going to play really, really good football and probably not make a number of mistakes that you can take advantage of. So you're going to have to be able to make your own. You're going to have to be able to force your own mistakes or take advantage of short fields and get in the touchdown. So whatever it is, I think this Alabama team just kind of has to assert their dominance this week. Show that number one ranking is no mistake. Show that you are by far the best team in the SEC, or not by far, but you are one of the best teams in the SEC, and handle this team that shouldn't be a problem. I fully understand that, but at the end of the day, coming off an emotional win, some of these games can become a problem in a hurry. So we'll figure out what this Alabama team is about this weekend, and we'll figure out if Vandy can totally change their program's history this upcoming weekend. We have to talk about this game because as we've gotten a little bit deeper in the season, as we've seen Ashton Jeanty go a little bit further, and everyone started talking about the Heisman race. They've started talking about, Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty and Cam Ward and Jalen Milroe. The problem is they don't have them ranked correctly. If Ashton Jeanty is anywhere below your number 2 ranking, he's too low. Just plain and simple. If it's not Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty, or Ashton Jeanty, Travis Hunter, you are doing something wrong. Ashton Jeanty leads the country in total rush yards per game, rushing touchdowns, yards per carry, over 10 yards per carry, total touchdowns, all-purpose yards per game. He is doing things that should not be possible on a college football field, especially for a kid that's 5'9" playing at Boise State. It should not be possible. And you can miss me with he plays in the Mountain West thing. He did this against Oregon. He tore them to pieces and made that entire defense just shake in their boots. And frankly, he could have been on any team in the country this year. He decided to come back to Boise State. He decided that he was going to ride it out with the Broncos. And frankly, I promise you, if you look through a couple of his DMs, a couple of his text messages this time in the offseason, you would have been shocked at the numbers that were thrown at him. I'm just saying that, plain and simple. He is one of the most dangerous. He's the best back in the country. And frankly, right now, it's not all that close. Caleb Johnson's playing really good football. The biggest thing here, if you just took the yards after contact for him, he would be number 5th in the country in rush yards. This kid is absolutely different in every way. By the way, shout out to Evie Handigan for that stat. But at the end of the day, very, very dangerous player. One of those guys that you have to be able to watch. And frankly, I don't care if it's Utah State. I don't care if it's Fresno State. I don't care if it's UNLV. This kid deserves your attention. Watch him and then come back to me because I promise you your Heisman rankings will change once you watch this kid. He is as dynamic as any running back I've ever seen in the history of college football. And frankly, I think he's going to do things this year that we're going to have a tough time fathoming, regardless of what conference he's in. I think this is my Heisman favorite, and if he keeps this pace, I have no problem giving him that Heisman. Then we got this one, and this is very, very weird because, frankly, this was supposed to be the main event of the weekend. It was supposed to be Missouri A&M was kind of that second tier, and then you had this one. You had the big-time game that was going to define the ACC. You had who was going to maybe play Miami in the title game or maybe just a precursor to what the title game was going to be down the road. And then Florida State started playing football, and things got very, very sketchy in a hurry. It was one of those things that, at this point, I thought about not even touching on this game. Insane, I know. But at the end of the day, this is a game that Clemson should be able to handle. They should absolutely make a statement this upcoming weekend. It is going to be Brock Glenn for DJU, and I understand people have wanted DJU to be benched. It's not going to get any better. This offense is just not very good. They don't have the guys, regardless of the quarterback that is behind there, they don't have the guys to compete with a lot of these teams. So Clemson's got to win this one, and of course they have to win this one. They have to win this one and cover. I think they have to be able to prove that it's not about, where you're playing, it's not about the energy, because there's going to be energy there. The defense is going to play pretty good football because they've kind of found themselves, but at the end of the day, they got to win, they got to cover, they got to prove that they are the class of the ACC right up there with Miami, and Florida State is just another game for them. So it's going to be really interesting to watch that one unfold, especially with all of the craziness that has kind of surrounded it early on in the season, with Florida State not playing nearly as good of football and Clemson kind of fighting themselves over the last couple of weeks. Maybe Clemson asserts their dominance. Maybe Florida State just totally shocks us this upcoming weekend and Brock Glenn becomes a legend around Tallahassee, and people have some big-time questions about why DJU started the season. But at the end of the day, I do have Clemson in that game. I think they're going to downright dominate them, if I'm being totally honest, but going to be a really fun one nonetheless. But let's take our final break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about my hot takes for this upcoming weekend. I think it's a very weird weekend, one of those that could kind of sneak up on you just a little bit. So I'll break my takes down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just got to all of the games that I just didn't have a chance to get to throughout this week. Definitely a couple more that I want to get to tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But, excuse me, I apologize. Let's get to my hot takes for this upcoming weekend, and I think it's going to be a weird weekend. I'll be totally honest with you guys. I think it's one of those weekends where it kind of sneaks up on you, and then you get hit in the face, and a lot of things happen very quickly, and I think Kevin Jennings is going to be one of those things. He's one of those players that came into this season as in a little bit of a battle, and they've tried to figure out just how to handle all this. The BYU game was very, very weird. They didn't necessarily have a rhythm on offense and really didn't have a rhythm offensively for the first couple of weeks. And then Kevin Jennings really took this job, and things really started clicking. SMU has scored 66 points and 42 points in their last two games. Kevin Jennings is 14 for 19, 137 yards, 2 touchdowns against TCU, 16 for 23, 254 yards, 3 touchdowns against who'd they play last week? I can't remember who they played last week. But at the end of the day, he played a big-time game. Florida State is who they played. But he was really, really good in both those games, and I think he's just ramping up. I think he's just finding himself a little bit more in this offense, and I think even against a Louisville defensive line that is going to be a problem, even against a Louisville defense in general that is very, very solid, I think this offense has really found something, and I think they have a number of ways to attack you. I think they have so many different weapons that it's going to be really hard to handle. And then Kevin Jennings can break a 50-yard run. He's so dangerous on the offensive side of the ball, and I think this is a huge moment for this SMU team. This is a huge moment for them to possibly turn a little bit of a corner, make them feel a little bit better about where they sit in the ACC. And although you have that loss to BYU that obviously looks a little bit better right about now, but it's one of those games that if you win this one, you're probably the number 3 team in the ACC going forward. If you lose it, then you're probably asking a lot of questions about where you fit into the ACC going forward. So I think Kevin Jennings just kind of takes over this game. I think when we talk about this week, I think he's going to be one of the first thing that comes out of your mouth because I think he's going to have a crazy day. I know that sounds a little bit counterintuitive because of how good I think Louisville's defense is, but I just think there's an opening here that SMU is going to be able to exploit, and Kevin Jennings is going to be at the very center of that. And then you got Ole Miss. I just think their CFP hopes become razor thin this upcoming weekend, and frankly, I don't think it even has to be because they lose. I am picking them to lose this upcoming weekend, but I don't even think it has to be them losing. I think when you look at that game going to South Carolina, they have to be able to prove that they're a different team than they were a week ago. They have to be able to prove that they can walk out there and be physically imposing, be the team that can win running the ball, can win being physical and at the point of attack and just bullying you out of the building. They weren't able to do that last week, and this is going to be another test of physicality that they're going to have to be able to deal with, and we'll see what they can do in this game. But at the end of the day, I think this is one of those games where you see a team schedule a bunch of, let's just be totally honest, cupcakes to start the season, and then you get into conference play and you play really physical opponents, especially in the SEC, and things get really tough. And frankly, I think we're going to see a lot of this over the next couple of years. We're seeing a couple of different examples this year, even with Miami, even last week. Or Miami's a little bit different of example because they did play Florida. They did play a couple of teams, but I think there's a number of teams that have played a little bit of easy opponent. Maybe it happens to Ohio State this upcoming weekend against Iowa. Maybe there was just not enough games to really get this team going, especially from a physical perspective. And I think there's a number of things that South Carolina could do that, at least offensively, could be tougher to deal with than what Kentucky gave them. Maybe defensively they're a little bit easier to deal with, but that pass rush can cause all types of problems. And I think Ole Miss is one of those teams that I'd love to be wrong, frankly, if I'm being totally honest with you. I love the composition of this team. I think they're so much fun to watch. I think Jackson Dart leading the way with Trey Harris catching balls and all of these guys that are going to be absolute problems for this team. It's so much fun to watch them. At the end of the day, I don't know if they have the O-line or the intangibles to really win this game. I don't think they have the ability to really keep up in the SEC race, and it's one of those seasons that you're going to look back on, I think, as an Ole Miss fan and just be really disappointed about where you landed. I think a couple of our really fun, surprise, undefeated teams are going to go down this weekend. And I hate to say it, but I think there's a number of different places where there's just real pitfalls for these teams this upcoming weekend. And I'll start with Rutgers. They head over to Lincoln to play Nebraska, and it's not going to be easy by any means. They barely got a win over Washington last week and kind of let them back into that game. And then Nebraska, obviously coming off that loss to Illinois, they badly want to win this game. They badly want to get back on the right track and kind of get this season at least where they want it to be going forward. It's going to be a tough game for Rutgers, and frankly, I don't think they come out on the right side of it. Then you got Duke, and I think this is one that, frankly, I think we all understand. I think we all understand that the teams that they've played early on in the season are not necessarily to the caliber of what they're going to play, and it's probably going to come to a screeching halt at some point. That being said, they were able to come back against a UNC team that isn't great, but having a 20-point lead should do you enough to beat this Duke team. It wasn't for that UNC team. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this one unfold. I think it's one of those things that the Georgia Tech offense is just going to be too much for this defense, at least if I had to imagine. Maybe Duke answers the bell and plays really, really good football. I just think it's going to be really tough to down in Atlanta this upcoming weekend. Another one to watch is obviously Pitt heading to Chapel Hill. I think this one's a little bit less sketchy than the other ones, but at the end of the day, UNC's angry. They have a lot to play for. They have their coach to play for right about now, and we'll see if they can possibly handle it. Maybe Omarion Hampton goes for 250 yards, totally takes over this game. And then you got a couple others. I think UNLV inviting Syracuse to town is going to be a really interesting one. They should be able to handle it. If I had to imagine, I think they're going to win that game. I picked them to win that game. But then you got Indiana heading to Northwestern. You got the Service Academy playing some big-time games against Air Force and Tulsa, respectively, Navy and Army. But it's going to be really, really interesting to watch these ones unfold. I just think we lose a couple of these really fun stories that we've had early on in the season. Hopefully we don't. Hopefully they run the table again and we get a little bit more interesting going forward. But as of right now, I don't necessarily love where they're at. Missouri season, I think, turns from a CFP berth to a 9-3 season this upcoming weekend. I think this Missouri team has just kept me on edge the entire season. There's not a game that I've been able to watch for this Missouri team that I've said, okay, that's what I expected. That's what I thought this team was going to be. They're explosive offensively, they're playing opportunistic defense, and they're getting down the field and playing and scoring a ton of points. That's what I expected to see. I have yet to see that from this team. They were able to beat Boston College. They were able to beat Vandy. There were a couple of different things that if they didn't happen in that game, they're coming out on the wrong side and things get really, really bad for this team. I think Missouri has as favorable, probably the most favorable schedule in the entire SEC. I think Texas is probably right up there with them, frankly. But I think when you talk about the CFP, it's absolutely a possibility. But the reality is this team could probably go 10-2 and still miss out, especially if you have Tennessee, Ole Miss, Texas, Georgia, Alabama all up there at the top. It's going to be really hard for Missouri to be able to pick themselves out of the group. So I think this weekend, they have not necessarily gotten off the ground offensively. A&M is not necessarily the place to do that. Going to A&M to play this defense is not necessarily a place to get right, if you will. So they're going to have to be able to really get something going early on in this game, especially running the ball. And if they can't, maybe it's just one of those days that Missouri just gets absolutely railroaded and we have a ton of questions afterwards. And I think they're very capable. I don't necessarily want to bury this Missouri team by any means. They're very capable of walking into pretty much every stadium in the entire country and getting a double-digit win, including Kyle Field on Saturday. The thing is, I just don't have this team where they need to be right now. I just don't have this team really power rated all that high. I did have them at number 10 in the country. I didn't feel great about it. I'll be totally honest with you. I just don't feel at all great about any of the other teams. So I think this team can turn a corner this upcoming weekend. I just think it's going to be a really hard team to turn a corner on. So it's going to be really fun to watch this one unfold. I think Missouri kind of takes a little bit of a step back and realizes that a lot of these, skirting the line in some of these games against Boston College, against Vandy, was going to come back and bite them, and I think it will this upcoming weekend. Another team that's has a ton of hopes for this SEC season is Tennessee, and I think they show a little bit of more mortality this upcoming weekend. I think they're one of those teams that's been rolling along, not really showing any signs of weaknesses, and there's going to be one week where they do. That's just bound to happen in the world of college football. There's bound to be one game where things go a little bit sideways. And when you go to Fayetteville, things can get a little bit sideways in a hurry, to be totally honest with you. And I think Michael Hawkins is kind of a good example of what I'm saying here. When he came into that game, things got a little bit harder for that Tennessee defense. Now, I do think they were playing him a little bit differently than they were in the first half, obviously. But at the end of the day, I do think it's one of those things that when you're playing a Tennessee defense that has such a good defensive line, that has really athletic linebackers, getting an advantage in a numbers advantage in that box is hugely important. Taylor Green's going to give it to you. Michael Hawkins gave it to Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago, and we'll see what happens going forward. But at the end of the day, I think Taylor Green's going to be able to cause just enough problems for this team. I don't necessarily think that Arkansas is going to be able to run for 250 yards and do anything crazy in this one, but I think when you look at up in maybe the third quarter, they're only up 3 points, and they're having a really hard time containing Taylor Green, and you have some questions about this team. Now, I do think Tennessee is going to be able to win this one. I'm not necessarily worried about them not being able to win because at the end of the day, I think they're just comfortably a better team than what Arkansas is right now. But at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit of an opening to where maybe we look up in the second quarter, or maybe we're talking about this game on Monday and we're saying maybe Tennessee isn't quite the team that we thought they were. They're still very fantastic and absolutely can make a CFP run. Maybe they're just not totally infallible, and definitely one of those things that we'll find out this upcoming weekend. And I think Arkansas is going to push their buttons just enough in this one. The last take I have is I think Miami is going to be trailing at halftime in the Cal game. And this is one that, frankly, it's a lot of extenuating circumstances that have very little to do with the talent level of this team. I think this team is going to be incredible. I think they're going to be more than fine down the road of this season. I think traveling across the country is going to be incredibly tough. I think especially after that just happened, it's going to be really tough to just fully get your focus back. Now, I do think their mentality is going to be fine. I think when you have someone like Cam Ward on that football field, you're going to feel confidence. You're going to have a little bit of leadership about you, and you're probably going to be able to get through this moment. I just think there's going to be a moment where we look up at halftime and say, man, that travel really got to him, or man, that defense just didn't quite make the couple of plays they needed to early on in this game, or maybe Cal's just running the ball really effectively early on, and then it gets a little bit more drawn out. But I do think Miami will be fine. I think they more than take care of business here. I have them winning by 16 points. But at the end of the day, I just think that halftime score is going to be a little bit, be one at least that catches your attention. I think you're going to look up and say, maybe Cal can push this team, and then Miami takes over in the second half. I just think it's one of those things that you're traveling such a far way. You're playing a team that is plenty capable of running the ball very effectively, and it's one of those things that I think they'll be fine, but it might just take a second for this Miami team to get fully going. Won't necessarily change the way I feel about this team, but at the end of the day, one of those things that traveling across the country is a very new concept in college football, at least for a conference game, and maybe it gets Miami the most this upcoming weekend. But it's a crazy weekend coming up, and we will cover a little bit more of it on tomorrow's show, but it's going to be crazy. I can almost promise you that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all of the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So playoff baseball, have you covered. NFL going underway, have you totally covered. Obviously basketball, getting close to coming up, absolutely have you covered. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.